Hey, and welcome, gurus, to this lesson. I'm Chase, one of your Azure training architects here at Cloud Guru. And in this network security groups flow logs lesson, we're going to start off by describing what NSG flow logs are. We'll then take a look at an example of an NSG flow log so that we can understand how we might interpret these when we see them. We're then going to talk about the required components that are involved in enabling NSG flow logs on our NSGs. We'll talk about some common use cases for doing so. We'll talk about the native analytics that are provided for visualizing our NSG flow logs, and then we'll wrap up this lesson with some key takeaways. So without further ado, let's get started. So to get started describing NSG flow logs, it's important that we understand that NSG flow logs are those logs that we're using to capture traffic that is going ingress and egress through our NSGs, whether they're at the subnet or the network interface boundary. And these NSG flow logs are being logged to a storage account in a JSON format so that we could look at them later and feed them into other visualization tools. Now, each of these flows is going to be shown on a per rule basis because the flow comes in through the NSG boundary and it matches with the rule that allows it either to continue or it ends that traffic right there. And we'll have that record of that flow in JSON format logged to that storage account. Now, this is specifically logging of IP traffic of our network security groups. And when we break down a flow event, this is what we get here. We'll have a epoch timestamp that lets us know when the traffic came through. We'll have a source IP that's going to tell us where the traffic originated. Then we have a destination IP, which is going to tell us where the traffic is going. Then we're going to have a source port, which is going to tell us the ephemeral port that was used from the source itself. And then we have the destination port to tell us what port it's going to be reaching out at that destination IP. We then have the protocol, be that TCP or UDP. We have our traffic flow, and this is inbound or outbound. And in this case, we have outbound. We have the traffic decision, and this is allowed or denied because, again, it's matching to a specific security rule on that NSG. So in this case, it was allowed. Then we have that flow state to tell us whether or not the traffic began here at this security rule, or this is just a continuation of another traffic, or this is the end of the traffic. So in the case of we denied this traffic, instead of seeing a C, we'd see an E because the traffic would end here instead of continuing. It continued because it was allowed. Then we have our packets from the source to the destination. Then we have the bytes from the source to the destination. And then we have our packets from the destination to the source. And then, of course, the bytes from the destination to the source. All right, gurus, now that we understand what NSG flow logs are and we've interpreted what one looks like, let's talk about the required components that go into enabling NSG flow logs. In order to enable our NSG flow logs, the first thing that we need is to make sure that Network Watcher is enabled for the region where the NSG that we're enabling NSG flow logs for exists. So in this case, if the NSG is in West US, we need to make sure Network Watcher is enabled inside of West US to use the NSG flow logs. Then we need to make sure that the subscription has the Microsoft.Insights provider registered. And then we need to make sure that the network security group has an association, whether that is on a subnet or a network interface, doesn't really matter. We just need to have it associated with something so that traffic can be moving through it. Then we need to have our storage account inside of the same region as the network security group, so that we can make sure to associate that storage account with that NSG so that the NSG flow logs will be sent to the storage account. Now, the common use cases for NSG flow logs are going to be network monitoring. We might also have usage monitoring so that we can understand what's going on inside of our traffic. We may have compliance monitoring. Maybe we need to understand the security rules and what they're doing inside of our traffic to determine the effectiveness of our security rules. And maybe we'll even use them for things like forensics, so that if we have an event, we can go back and take a look at the NSG flow logs to understand what happened. And we can also extend these logs with various tools, such as we can visualize our logs with Power BI. We could visualize with Elastic Stack. We could use Grafana to manage and analyze these logs, and we could use something like Graylog to manage and analyze these logs as well. Now, while we could use any of these tools and various others to extend the functionality of our NSG flow logs, we can also use the native analytics that we have in our NSG flow logs, known as traffic analytics. And we'll cover more on this in a later section of this course as we get into talking about Azure Monitor. But for now, it's important that we know that it exists, and we'll talk about the required components for traffic analytics. So for traffic analytics, what we want to do is, again, make sure that Network Watcher is enabled for the region where the NSG exists. We want to make sure that Microsoft.Insights provider is registered on the subscription where NSG lives. We want to make sure that that NSG is associated with a subnet or network interface boundary. And then for traffic analytics, we want to make sure that we have a log analytics workspace configured, because that log analytics workspace is going to act as the storage endpoint for our traffic analytics, so that whenever our NSGs come in, they won't just go to a storage account, they'll go to log analytics as well. And those flows stored in log analytics will be visualized inside of traffic analytics in Azure. Now, the key takeaways here from this lesson on NSG flow logs consist of a really short list, and that's because NSG flow logs is a relatively simple component of extending our network security groups. One of the first is to understand that NSG flow logs log traffic to an endpoint, such as our storage account or a log analytics workspace if we're using traffic analytics. And using NSG flow logs on our NSGs, we can aggregate, monitor, and with traffic analytics, also visualize our NSG flows so that we can use it for things like network monitoring, forensics. We can use it for usage monitoring or compliance, and just overall to evaluate the effectiveness of our security rules on our NSGs. We also have to understand that we have to have Network Watcher enabled in the region where our NSG lives, Microsoft.Insights registered as a provider on the subscription where NSG lives. We have to have an NSG that has an association with a subnet or NIC boundary, and then we have to have that endpoint for monitoring. And the last thing that we need to remember is that we can extend into native and third-party toolings to help us visualize those NSG flows that we are storing to our storage accounts or log analytics workspaces. All right, gurus, that is all my time for now. Thanks so much for joining me on this lesson on NSG flow logs. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.